Good day, and welcome to another one of Ransom's weekly roundups. As usual, what we'll do is we'll go with three stories that happened in the week that affects your finances, and end up with a bit of a tech, addendum at the end. Okay, so the three stories of the week are going to be as follows. We're going to look at what's happening with Iran at the moment, and obviously, that's a bit of a story. Then we're going to look at the Competition Commission and some of the weight it's throwing around, and finally, our deep dive is going to be into the US downgrade and what that means for the world. And for our AI sector / tech sector, I'm going to give you a bit of a deeper understanding of that stuff that's happening with the LK99 superconductor candidate, as well as a little bit of AI news that's happening at the moment. Okay, let's start off with the Competition Commission. Okay, so the Competition Commission, is meant to be out there to basically ensure that South African firms don't act in a monopolistic manner, that there's competition in the market, and ensure the smooth operating of the South African economy. This has been a known danger of capitalism from time immemorial. Basically, since Adam Smith wrote his book, he's talked about the fact that monopolies are a danger to economies. So you need to have a competition commission out there to ensure that you don't have a firm taking control of a certain sector and charging exorbitant prices, and and consumers have no other option as to what to do. And that has been the purpose of these competition commissions globally. Okay, antitrust in the US, broke up Standard Oil, the UK, Europe, everyone has one of these things. Now the question is that all they do? Well, in some parts of the world, that is all they do, fight to ensure there's competition. In South Africa, our Competition Commission has taken upon itself to have a rather broad mandate. It looks at things like stakeholders, it looks at things like diversity in the workforce, it looks at things like diversity in ownership, protection of workers, etc. And it goes beyond just competition. It kind of ensures, I don't know how you would phrase it, kind of a status quo in the South African economy, is almost what it is like. And the reason I bring it up right now is the Competition Commission has come out with a number of things. It's gone after Airlink regarding its pricing of a certain route from Joburg to Matata, I think it is, and back. It's gone after Takealot because apparently they are acting in a monopolistic manner, even though they aren't making any money. So it's a very bad monopoly. They basically are out there, taking too much money from people and not making enough profits to basically make a viable business. They've gone up to recently the food guys, food producers, the whole food chain. In the past, they've gone after the building sector, and I would like to take the building sector as an example of what I think the problem is here. In about 2010 or so, after the World Cup, major investigations into construction in the South African economy. There was a finding of monopolistic practices. These firms were forced to do certain things, and it wasn't just on competition. There was a diversity angle to this. There was a number of different things that they asked these construction companies to do. And if you look at the South African construction sector at the moment, it's virtually dead. They regulated this particular sector almost out of existence. Marion Roberts, Avenge, those kind of guys. Look at the share prices now. They are a fraction of what they once were. And people out there may be saying, "Oh, but they were overcharging in the past." No, they were not overcharging. If you look at the margins of some of these companies, Marion Roberts, Avenge, and so on, they often at some point in times were getting smaller margins to build massive skyscrapers or build bridges than Checkers got for putting an item on the shelf. Checkers would buy an item and put it in the shelf, and the difference between what they bought it for and what they put in the shelf was bigger than the margin that you'd get for basically the materials, labor, etc. of building a bridge, and what you got from the consumer or the customer at the end of the day. So it wasn't like they was really making these huge gigantic profits. But the Competition Commission went in there, found some laws were being broken, and regulated things, and it's like I said, a very, very damaged industry at the moment. And I fear that that's something that's going to be happening going forward. It's more and more difficult to do any kind of large business in South Africa. Every single law, out there is against being a big business in South Africa, unless you're an incumbent, and you're a huge incumbent. Because, then you can actually, have a team that's out there dedicated to actually making sure you don't break the law, or if you do break the law, fighting, or getting a settlement or something out there. It's very difficult for a normal operator to basically grow up to a large enough size. Look at Takealot. Obviously it's not a tiny company, but they are going to be facing competition from Amazon, from the big global players. And like I said, they aren't exactly out there making a fortune at the moment. And we are going to be regulating them effectively before they even are at a point where they are break even or making some money. So yes, the Competition Commission purpose is obviously needed, because like I said, it's one of the known failures of capitalism. However, you need to have a scope that's like a bit more or application and enforcement of these rules that's a bit more, I think, favorable, or at least understanding of the context of the sort of economy at the moment. Okay. So that's one. The next thing is the rand. The rand has weakened dramatically. So we're looking at, as I speak to you right now, above 1850 to the US dollar. From being about 1750 a few days ago. Now, what caused this? A number of theories. There's almost the economic theory. We are seeing good numbers of the US because of the economic growth, which tends to be something that is going to make the dollar a little stronger, because the expectations are of either more rate hikes, or in this case, more likely, fewer rate cuts, or rate cuts are going to be delayed a bit longer. So these current levels will be held a bit longer. There's also the possibility that a video from the EFF, I don't know if you watched that video where the EFF sang the struggle song, kill the boer, kill the farmer. It's actually had a huge splash internationally. I mean, people like Elon Musk have created it. It's got a real traction in the US, kind of like, right-wing sphere, and even parts of Europe as well. And that could also be something that, has affected this. Strangely enough, we know what the EFF is, and we know what they do, but sometimes internationally people don't understand how the South African economy works, how the South African system works. And that could be one of the reasons we are seeing a bit of weakness come through right now. And of course, the ongoing load shedding that we've been talking about for quite some time is still around, and there seems to be no sign, especially if you look historically. We are likely in a couple of months' time to get out of what's normally the good period, and go to a much more difficult period for Eskom. And the good period right now, we're doing 1 and 4, and sometimes 2 and 4, and occasionally 6s as well in terms of load shedding levels. So yes, there's a number of factors that could be affecting, but the rand is weakened. And another thing that's also basically changed is that we've seen the oil price over the last month or so. It's gotten a lot stronger. A couple of days, we've got a weakness here, but if we look at where we were, say, the end of June till now, we're talking about more than a double-digit improvement in terms of dollar price for the Brent crude price. So we're talking Brent crude from like 72 to over 82. Okay, that's like a 14% move. And then we compare that to the fact that we've also seen the rand weaken, like I said, 1850 and so on. I fear that we might be seeing a return of inflation if these numbers don't change soon. We've seen inflation come down quite nicely. We were below 5.5%. This could easily change, especially with fuel and the rand the way being it is. So yeah, that is the rand at the moment, weaker. The reasons are not very clear, but there's a number of different candidates for that. And if it doesn't change reasonably soon, given the current situation, oil prices, and by the way, with food prices as well, we could really be in trouble in terms of inflation returning in South Africa. And then finally, the US downgrade. The US has downgraded from AAA to AA. It's called one of the agencies out there. Others have done it in the past. I think Sesame did it a decade or so ago, and which has changed now. So it's almost a symbolic thing, because quite frankly, the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. It has not changed. People are not going to be out there saying, oh my God, the US dollar is there. We're not going to trust the US dollar. It is the foundation of the global economic system. It takes a lot to change the foundation of the global economic system. The example I would use the last time this happened was when the pound was replaced by the dollar. It did not happen after World War I. It happened after World War II. And then it took a while after World War II. It didn't happen immediately as World War II occurred. And by World War II, Britain was by no means a significant power in the world. I mean, despite all the stuff about Churchill and that kind of stuff, the UK was little more than a landing spot for the Americans in their launch into Europe. The Russians played a bigger role in World War II than the British did. The German economy, of course, the Germans were, of course, the other side of World War II, and he took the Russians, the Germans, Russians, the Americans, and the British to defeat the Germans. The Germans were big players already. So by that point in time, you could easily argue the UK was maybe 3 or 4 economy in the world in terms of importance, but the UK pound was still the reserve currency of the world. Just it takes a long time to change these things. There's no idea that the US is not going to be a top 1 or 2 economy in the world in the foreseeable future. And if that is the case, and the UK as a pound is an example, I don't expect any kind of real danger for the US dollar in terms of its reserve currency status at the moment. And in fact, if you look out at the world, the number 2 currency is China, and there's so many issues with China at the moment that for much of the West, I think the US dollar is the only option out there. The euro, I think, there is a possibility it might be an alternative, but it's been around for over a couple of decades now, and it really hasn't found that traction in national reserves that the US dollar has. The US dollar is still by far the dominant currency out there. But why was the US downgraded? Okay, the US is still like the fastest growing large developed economy in the world. The US still is the fount of innovation. Everything that's positive, except for a couple of things like we'll talk about a little bit. The tech sector comes from the US. Most of the last, the internet stuff's come there. The AI stuff is definitely focused there. In terms of manufacturing, in terms of income levels, in terms of growth rates, the US is still the best. But what was the reason put down was apparently the Trump, related riots in 2021, and quite frankly, the possibility that Trump wins in 2024 possibly played a role in this as well. Why is this important? Because I don't know if you've been watching the US political system at the moment, but in the right, things are getting a little more chaotic. Joe Biden is recognizable to anybody, looking at US politics. In the last, 30 years or so, since Reagan. Okay, it's a similar kind of idea. Yes, he has some stuff about, trans rights and that kind of thing, but in terms of operating the economy, in terms of operating the US government, he hasn't really changed things dramatically. He's more of a continuation of what's been happening in the past. Some of the candidates out right now in the Republican side are very different. Trump, because of the latest indictment, has promised to take revenge on the US government, effectively by destroying agencies. Trump, basically, at the moment, to give you an idea, wins against the rest of the field combined, effectively. He's more than half. There's so many people out there, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, I think that's how it's pronounced, Vivek, Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie. All these guys together don't make up the numbers that Trump has on his own. So he's almost, unless something happens to his health or his legal troubles become such a burden that he can't continue, he's likely to be the Republican candidate next year. And by the way, the legal troubles are going to be very difficult to basically translate into, excluding him from the presidential race, because he could run for president from prison. That's not banned by the laws of the U.S. government here. So yeah, he could easily be the president next year. Joe Biden's approval ratings are 15% lower than they were, favorability and unfavorable ratings than they were last week for Trump. And despite all the stuff you've heard, the last election was very, very close. Less than 50,000 people out of the 100-something million that are eligible to vote in the US. We're talking out of 100 million plus people eligible to vote, 50,000 or less than 50,000 was the difference between a Trump presidency or a Biden presidency. Yes, Biden won by a lot more votes overall, but they don't matter. The US has a system where they have the electoral college. And if basically Trump had won 50,000 votes in the right places, he'd be president right now. Okay? And like I said, Biden is significantly less popular now than he was before, being hit by some significant issues around his son as well, around bribery. So yeah, I think that is one of the reasons that we are seeing, some of the agencies really wonder about what's going to happen next year, because there's not an insignificant chance that a Republican wins next year. And if you look at the Republican candidates, you've got Trump, of course, as the most aggressive, but the person that's rising the most is just as aggressive, in fact, maybe more than Trump when it comes to reforming how the US government works. Vivek Ramaswamy, like I told you, number 3 at the moment from nowhere, close on the heels of Ron DeSantis, was number 2. Talking about abolishing the FBI, cutting the feds, the U.S. Federal Reserve staff by more than half, talking about some significant changes to various sectors in the government, so significant changes to how the government operates. And again, like I said, uncertainty breeds this weakness. Okay, and now let's go to our tech sector. I want to do a little deeper dive into what's happening with regards to the superconductor question at the moment and why that's important. But just a couple of things I want to keep remind, there's the deal between Facebook and Microsoft in terms of how they're operating in the space seems to be creating a bit of a coalition against Google at the moment, or Alphabet. What's happening with regards to international regulation? I think it's becoming more and more interesting. We are seeing some serious moves against OpenAI from the US as well, where there's been subpoenas of incredible scope in terms of like every single thing that you could possibly ask the company they've been subpoenaed for. And so we started to see a bit of regulatory fight back coming through. It remains to be seen, just what the path forward is going to be like. However, another thing came out was Goldman Sachs is saying that by 2025, we're talking about the year after next, as much as 4% of the US economy could be AI related. 2 years, 1.5 years. 4% of the US economy AI related. That's huge. We're talking close to $1 trillion. It's a massive amount of money. AI is still popping up there. But another thing came up the last week or so, and I mentioned it last week, is this thing called LK99. LK stands for the initials of the people that discovered it, and 99 refers to the date. What have this claim discovered? They claim to discover what's called a room temperature superconductor. Room temperature superconductor, let's just explain what it is. It turns out that if you take some materials and make them very, very, very cold, they turn into what's called a superconductor, which has some magical abilities. One thing, it has basically no resistance. So you could put a current in there, and the current will go round and round a loop of the superconductor, for almost indefinitely. Another thing it does is it kind of bends magnetic waves. So if you take one of these superconductors and put them above a magnet, they will float, they will levitate. And there's a couple other things that are interesting about this particular thing in terms of its usefulness. But there's many, many things you could use this thing for. Firstly, if you had no resistance, you can build power lines as long as you want to, tens of thousands of miles or kilometers. You could literally, if you wanted to, put solar panels in the Sahara and power New York City from them. Right now, if you did that, what would happen was there'd be too much power lost along the way on those cables from the Sahara to the US to justify this kind of thing. But if you had, that there, you could have literally a global grid, a global electrical grid, and from the entire world of solar if you wanted to, because you'd have solar traveling around the world. You could create batteries that are significantly more efficient. Massive flywheels. You could have floating trains. There's a number of different uses you could have for a superconductor. The problem with superconductors is the temperature is very, very low. So how do you keep the temperature that low? Well, people use liquid hydrogen, liquid nitrogen in some cases. They kind of like lower the temperature of the material until it reaches conductivity. And of course, keeping things that cold is very difficult on a planet that's hotter, basically everywhere we're talking about, than the temperature you require. Even like medical stuff. the MRI machines that you send thousands and tens of thousands of to get a single scan. The reason for that is that basically the magnet is so powerful, it has to be shielded. That shielding, it requires superconductors, in order to work. If not, you're going to need to be using tons and tons, literally tons. I think the first, MRI machines were using like 40, 50 tons of iron around these machines to make sure that they weren't, sending their waves everywhere. And, they're so powerful as magnets, they could be causing quite a bit of damage. So, a number of uses of these things. The problem is, like I said, keeping it cold. So, people have been trying for years and years to try and get a superconductor that's viable at room temperature. The other thing besides temperature is also pressure. You can get a higher temperature superconductor if you keep the pressure up, with hundreds of atmospheres, which is again another very difficult thing to do. So if you were able to get a room temperature superconductor, you would have, a significant improvement, in terms of power transmission, in terms of transport for things like levitation, in terms of medical, advancements. It's a hugely beneficial thing. And a group of Korean scientists have come out and they've claimed to have had a discovery that creates a room temperature superconductor, in fact, above room temperature. They're talking about temperatures like, at a boiling point of water and above. We're talking a really, really heavy temperature here. And if this is true, it would be, notwithstanding the AI stuff, probably the greatest scientific innovation in our lifetimes. I'm talking, if you could be 70 years old, it's the greatest thing. We haven't had a basic fact of science that seems important that is discovered now. Maybe since the semiconductors, maybe since the transistor. That's when we're looking at, decades and decades ago. It would change our world significantly, especially the world in physical terms. The problem is that it's difficult to discover whether or not this is real or not. requires some effort to create it. Apparently, there's some poisonous stuff in there, like lead, and so you just can't do it anywhere. But if you want to be safe, but apparently a lot of people are trying to stay in an unsafe environment, and there has been some confusion as to what's really happening in terms of results. Some people are saying yes, it is floating. The rocks are floating. Some people are saying no, it's floating for other reasons, called diamagnetism, which is to make a thing here. Is another thing that can cause things to float, but is not superconductivity, and therefore could still be useful. I mean, things floating are great, but may not have the resistance stuff that we're worrying about. There's also the question about whether or not these people are lying, because there has been another guy in the past, in the recent past, who's come up with a claim of a room temperature superconductor, and he's lied. I think the consensus right now that his stuff is a hoax, and we've had other things like this in the past as well. So cold fusion, if you remember, also probably turned out to be a hoax. Strangely enough, science right now it's very difficult to understand what's real and what's not. So, as I basically speak to you right now, here's the thing. My belief is that we don't have proof of a room temperature superconductor at the moment, but we do have proof that things are weird in this particular material. And it may just be that we may not get superconductivity, but we may get a stronger diamagnetism or diamagnet, because then it's a little different than what we have currently. And that might be, like I said, useful in its own. There's ways to use that are interesting, even though it may not be used for everything a superconductor may be used for. And there's still a possibility it is a superconductor, just that the impurities are making some of the measurements a bit difficult. If it does happen, if we do have this being created, there's a number of strategies I think that would work in terms of how you as an investor could take a profit from it. But let us see for the confirmation first. If it is confirmed, I'll come back to you guys. I'll give you some ideas as to how you as a retail investor can actually profit from this new invention. Okay, that's it me for this week. And thanks for joining me. And I look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Cheers.